Preacher just brought me a bottle here. I assume it's water out there.
Well, drink it and you'll find out.
If it gets going on too long, well, you need to come take it away. I'd like to welcome all of you here tonight, and especially our friends from Evan. Glad to see the Scout group is here, both members and leaders. I think it's important that you people are, well, maybe exposed is not the right word, but learn a little bit about our background here. And certainly want to welcome all the local people. And I'm not going to start calling names, except I just recognize the mayor sitting over here. I think to welcome him and Ms. Stevens. Now, I'm going to pick on him just a little bit, and then I promise I won't do anything like that later on. But I'm going to say a month or so back, I was in McDonald's one morning, got a cup of coffee, and I realized they were sitting up there. And it was a cool morning. I had on a little light jacket, and it just so happened there was an NC State emblem right here. Well, walked up to his table, and immediately that hand came up and covered that up. Now, I don't know if he realized it or not, but the time will come, I'll get it back, you know. It's out there, and it'll happen. Okay. Thank you for coming, and certainly appreciate this good crowd, and I hope that it turns out that it's very worthwhile. Now, I'm going to make a statement here, and I don't think it's really required, but I'm going to make it anyway. I hope we don't get out of balance in talking about our history. Certainly, we need to look at our history. We need to make sure the younger people coming along are aware of our history. But as we go along, we need to keep in mind that our main purpose here is not to promote our history, rather our main purpose for this church, or any church for that matter, of course, is to provide a place for worship and to honor and glorify God. So I think if we, and I'm going to sound like at times that the history is the most important thing, but I'll get carried away a little bit, but we'll back off and make sure that it just simply doesn't get out of balance. Now, our information is from several sources. Part of what I'll talk about will be actually factual, and we have records and books and so forth to back it up. Part of what I'll talk about will be based on something that happened, but down through the years may have changed a little bit. You know, when people tell stories, they add a little bit or edit it here and there. And then the third part may be something just somebody made up along the line. I don't know. We've got a lot of things that supposedly happened here, and I'm sure that some of it has basis. Maybe some of it does not have basis. Let me just remember to ask, can everybody hear me okay? I don't want anybody to can't hear.
You're good.
You're good, okay. You know, I taught school for a couple of years, and I got hollered right much, so I think I can handle that okay. First thing I want to cover is what was in this area before Hawfields Church. Now, it's sort of a strange situation, and I'm going to end up suggesting that what happened here way back was within the providence of God, because it's simply some unusual things happened. Now, the name Hawfields came from people called this area Hall Old Fields, and then it got sort of put together, contracted, whatever. And that name has stuck, of course, through the years. Now, this used to, when we said Hawfields, it used to include about everything from either Back Creek or Haw River, and I mean the river, not the town, down to Eno River, and maybe even east beyond Midden, and basically west down to about where Highway 54 is. pretty good sized area, and of course, a lot of that area has developed in other directions and is not really considered part of Hawfields anymore. But the part that we want to look at is mainly the area here and probably down and beyond Hall Creek, at least back to Hall River in that direction, and maybe over to Mebane and maybe down to the edge of Swepsonville. Something unusual happened here, maybe in the 1600s. You know, the Indians weren't very good with their computers, so we don't have any records. In fact, we don't have any records from that time. But there was an area here that was entirely different than surrounding areas. There were trees, of course, but not thick wooded areas. And I've looked and looked at it, and I have not read this in a book, so it's strictly my idea. There probably was a tremendous forest fire here at one point. There had to be something to make this place different. And probably, you know, a dead tree got struck by lightning. Fire departments weren't open yet, and we had a big fire. It probably burned over a big area and killed about all the plant life that was here at that time. Now, there's, you know, if you, in this area, we're going to get into some forestry, we're going to get into some agriculture, we're going to get into some farming and on and on. But if you study forestry, one of the things you look at is what they call plant succession. And that means what will happen if you go out here and leave an area vacant for years and don't do anything to it, what's going to happen there? What's the first, who can tell me what's the first thing now we're talking about this area, we're not talking about California, we're not even talking about Castle County, we're talking about right here. What's the first thing going to grow here? Broom straw or broom sage. Okay, that is a natural plant, and if you leave some soil vacant any period of time, you're going to have a crop of broom straw. Okay, what's the next thing that's going to grow there? Say, might take 20 years. It doesn't come, this is not a rapid succession thing, but it will happen. What pine trees. Okay, pine trees will come along and grow in that broom straw, and they will grow for years and years. Now, pine, oak, and some of the hardwoods will grow under pine, but pine won't grow under other trees. The only place pine is going, now, I know some of you thinking, well, I know a pine tree out here that doesn't fit. Well, that can be true, but I'm talking about it in a general sense. Pine trees won't grow under a canopy of hardwoods. So pine trees got started here, and I'm going to just say around 1700, maybe a little earlier, but not much later. And there were Indians in this area, and by that I mean American Indians, not Indian Indians. American Indians lived in this area, but best we can tell, there never were any large groups of them. The Indians moved around a lot. They had famines, they had disease spread among them, all sorts of things that were, well, their enemies, so to speak, but they also fought among themselves a lot and would kill off whole tribes. So I think that the groups of Indians that actually lived here were here temporarily and maybe were either on the run from some other group or some reason they came through here. Now, like I say, there is evidence that there had been Indians living here. In fact, the original people that came here about 1740 weren't planning to come here at all, but they came through here and got information from up around the Salisbury area, and there was a big outbreak of, I assume it was either chicken pox or smallpox, some kind of pox, and large numbers of Indians had died because of that. This was, remember, back before 1740. And so those people decided it wasn't safe to go to the Salisbury area and stayed here. Now, of course, they stayed here after looking around. They saw these open fields. They saw these trees, and there were what some writers call a wild pea vine that grew here, and their animals could feed on that. So that was the main reason that some of these earlier settlers stayed in this area, actually, after they were planning to go somewhere else. Now, let me slow down a minute. If you have a question or something, raise your hand. I don't mind getting interrupted at all. Yeah.
They weren't Indians, they were Native Americans.
Can somebody tell me what he said?
They weren't Indians, they were Native Americans.
What Indians? They were Native Americans. I'm sorry, I should have explained that. If you have a question, or well, if you disagree with something I say, I don't guarantee everything I say will be perfectly right, because some things, one person thinks this happened, and somebody else thinks this happened, and we're not going to argue about any of that, because a lot of it doesn't really make any difference. Yeah.
The settlers you're talking about that didn't plan to stay here were coming from the east or coming down from Virginia?
Okay, thank you. That's a good question, and I would talk about that later, but I'll go ahead. It's fine. The people in this area mostly came down through the Shenandoah Valley from, well, Philadelphia. They came down, cut across close to the Danville area, came down sort of by Yanceyville, and came almost to Hillsborough, and then cut back across this way. The old trading path came across the backside of the cemetery over there. We've got a mark over there, I think it says it came right through there, and went from there on to towards Salisbury. Now Salisbury probably wasn't there at the time when I'm talking about that area. There used to be, you could see the route of the old trail through a field down here on my grandfather's farm. I don't know where any of you that knew Fenton even cut it. Where their house is, that trail went right through there. The old house that was there was torn down. The main 2 rooms was a log cabin. It had been added onto and remodeled. But that log cabin at one time was a station for stagecoaches, and they had a barn there where they traded off horses. In other words, the horse would come in and put a fresh horse and go on that. Now that house was added to and changed through the year, but we were always told when we were young that there was just one room of the log cabin, but when they started taking it down, the logs went all the way through, and there was 2 rooms. You know, when you cover it up with boards, you can't really tell what's there. Now, I want to, let's assume this is a TV station. We're going to put it on hold for just a few minutes and completely change the subject. But I want to come back to this, because I want you to remember we talked about those trees, those pine trees growing. Well, we're going to use those pine trees sometime back down the line, so remember that point. the earliest people probably came here in 1740. Now, the records don't all agree. The records back then were very poor. This community was never noted for keeping good records in the first place. Our church records are pretty good in some areas, but just an example, the little building down here that we call the session house, we assume it was built at the same time the sanctuary was built. However, there's no indication in the records. The only thing is, in one group of records, it says a session met in the session house. Now, it didn't say anything about building a session house, but if they met there, most likely it had been built at that time. So, anyway. Now, these models here were made by a group of men in the church, and I was going to call one name, and I can't think of it. Now, that is problems with stacking up a few years. Now that thing will come to me right now. I can't think of it. Anyway, first building they had was what's called a brush arbor. It was some poles put together and some tree limbs with leaves. And I assume that when these leaves died, they had to replace them. I'm not sure. But that was their first meeting place, and it was not here. Some of you, if you from the Bibbin area or down Bibbin Oaks, you know where the new, well, relatively new Japanese candy factory is. The first Hawfields church was built directly behind there. If you're going down the interstate, you look across that building, there's about an acre of land out there with some pretty good sized trees. Trees up bigger than anything around. And that was the location of the first church. The Bush Arbor and the first building. Now, back then, a lot of times, churches would locate on private property. Somebody would say, well, we need to build a church, and somebody would say, well, I got a field out here, you're welcome to put a church out there. And that's what happened. Now, about in the early 1920s, now I don't remember that, but anyway, early 1920s, the Wilson family that owned that land, and some of them still do some of the land around there, the Wilson family sold a little over an acre of land to this church, and there's a marker there that says when the building, when this was there, and when the Wilson sold it to the Hawfields Church. Now, before that, the church didn't own any property, so that that prevents us from going beyond a certain point as far as, say, public records are concerned. There simply is no public record of a church building because it was built on private property. And of course, up until 1949, that was still Orange County. So the first church was, and that may still be in Orange County now. The line goes right along there and close somewhere. But that's where the first the brush arbor and the building that this represents. Now the first two buildings were long buildings. Now I've got some antique tools over here, but I'm going to hold off on them and show them all at one time rather than interrupt them. Obviously, these first buildings, the logs were cut by hand. Now, I don't know how many of you remember going out and sawing wood. Some of you, I'm sure, do. I am going to show one tool and see if that brings back any memories. or something that looks like this. Yeah, I know. Okay. Now, this particular one is not, well, I mean, it's got some age, but it's not really as old as, say, for example, this church building. But it probably was made around 1940, somewhere through that area. But I thought it would, I would bring this, especially for some of the younger people. Now, what did you used to accuse somebody of doing if they weren't pulling their end right? They're riding a saw. Or either they'd say somebody, you know, if you're pulling back and it's getting too hard, you'd holler at them, well, if you're going to ride, pick up your feet, you know, something like that. But there were all kind of little sayings about these saws. Now, you can imagine, you get a hold of a big oak tree, it's a pretty good ways through it. And you got to have some manpower to operate this thing. It's not like pulling the rope on a chainsaw. Now, I have to admit that a chainsaw is not all that easy to handle anyway, when you get a little age, especially. But I thought it'd just be interesting. Some of our younger people might not be familiar with that. Now I'm gonna come around here. This first building is, it's dated 1760, and I'm gonna stop. It just came to my mind, the person that built these was Dave Murdoch. I'm sorry I couldn't remember his name. He's from Bed, some of you knew him, and he put a lot of time and effort in these, and I give him, of course he's not with us anymore, he passed away a couple of years ago, but and like I said, these are not perfect replicas, but they're the closest anybody could get, and I assure you, Dave made it as good as he possibly could. These, the tops come off, and I'll say some about the others there, but this was the first one after the brush arbor here. Any questions or comments so far?
Mr. Covington, there's still grave sites out there.
I'm sorry.
There's still grave sites out there with stones and headstones. The dates, some are just stones, some just have dates carved into the stones, but there are still grave sites out there at the first site.
Oh, okay, okay.
Sites and stones and cemetery at the first site.
Oh, okay. I hadn't been out there right lately. The thing that I remember that there's a whole lot of out there is poison oak. If you're allergic to poison oak, either cover up really well or don't go down there, because it'll get you in a heartbeat down there. Yeah.
These people that came down from Pennsylvania, were they mostly, British or Scottish, Scotch-Irish, Irish, or German? Do you have any sense of the ethnic?
I mean, I got something about that on a piece of paper here. Let me look at it. I can't remember everything. Okay. Well, maybe I got the wrong piece of paper. That's not any help. They were what are called Scotch-Irish. Now, I've had people get on me about how we use that word Scotch. And some people claim that's not proper to describe the Scots from Scotland, but that's what I've always said, and it's sort of hard to change. But you know who I'm talking about, and that's who they were, I'm pretty sure, that came here. And then now, we're talking about people that came here with families and stayed and established a home place, that sort of thing. There were a couple of explorers that went through here early on, maybe 1740 or maybe just a little bit earlier. And there are some there's some books written based on what they found and all that, but they did not stay here and did not live here. The first actual settlers were apparently, at some point, a lot of people in Scotland were offered land in Ireland and went there and lived a while, and those were some of the people that ended up coming to this area. And if you go, if you go north of here to the Danville area, and in fact Castle County, those people didn't come down through the Shenandoah Valley. They got off the boat at, I believe it's Newcastle in Delaware. It's a small town now, but it was a place that boats came and put some people off. And they migrated across Virginia, just north of the North Carolina line. And so those people have a whole different background than people that came here. And then the other side of that is that there were people that came to the Wilmington area, came up the river and settled as far as they could, say, come with their boats up the river. Now, there was very little contact between people here and the people that came up through what's the name of that river? Cape Fear, yeah, okay, thank you. I've got to wind it up. There's very little contact between the people that came up to Cape Fear and the people that lived in this area. And the reason for that, I've been told or understand, when you got down to about halfway to Chapel Hill, there was a complete difference in topography, complete difference in the growth of trees or whatever, and that there was such a big undergrowth from there to Federal, you just didn't go. There was no way to get through there. Now, I tried to find out about when Highway 54 down here was built. And does anybody know the year? I think it was in the early 30s, but I never did find any exact date. And I was going to cover this later, but I'll go on and talk about it now. That was one of the first highways in this area that was built to carry somebody to an exact place and not wind all over the country. See, these roads out here follow some kind of trail that the Indians created. What would happen through the years? You'd get a mud hole here. Well, what'd they do? They drove around the mud hole. And so eventually, the road went all over the place. Now, the old road from here to Yanceville, I doubt many of you remember that, but it was really crooked. They used to say that the road was so crooked that if you drove up there in a horse and wagon, the horse could eat hay out the back of the wagon. I won't go into more of that. But anyway, if you remember, it was crooked. And of course, eventually it was replaced. But now the Highway 54 was built pretty straight. If you realize that there's not too many curves. And another thing that I wanted to get to on that was back to these trees. These trees provided a source of a lot of lumber for a lot of different reasons. The two original bridges that were built over Paul River and Back Creek, that's if you go down to Alexander Wilson, head toward Brown, there were two bridges there, two concrete bridges. Now, they were formed and concrete poured on the spot. Now, the reason I know that is our grandfather sold them the timber to build it. He ran a sawmill and he furnished the timber to build those two bridges. Nowadays, and for some time, of course, you would bring in the concrete beams and Well, you pour part of it on the spot, but mostly would be hauled in. So that was something that came from the trees that grew in this area. And I don't know, there were some bridges on down toward Chapel Hill. Of course, one thing entered my mind, why did we need a road to Chapel Hill? The mayor's laughing, I got it right. Okay. I apologize for that remark, but I couldn't resist it. Okay. We'll go on, let's get back on these buildings here. This was the second building, and still a log building, and and I'm going to show two more tools here just because it fits in. These tools were probably, I don't mean these particular ones, but I mean tools like these would have been used in the construction of these log churches or log houses. Now, probably the earlier settlers brought these with them. Certainly none of these tools were manufactured in this area. This is called a broad axe. Some of the broad axes are sharpened just on one side, and that's mainly to go down and trim up or square up the edge of a log. This one happens to be sharpened on both sides. My guess is it started out one way and somebody got happy and sharpened the whole thing. I don't know. Can you imagine, and this thing's pretty heavy, can you imagine bent over a log most of the day whacking away at this thing? That's something I wanted to sort of bring out tonight, is what some of these early people went through for us to be where we are today. Oh yeah, didn't have any choice really. Now this is called an adze. Don't ask me to spell it, it's spelled 2 or 3 different ways. Some people put an S in it, some people put a Z. I don't know which is correct, and I don't know what kind of word that is. I've tried to find the background of that word, haven't been able to. Does anybody know about that word?
Foot ad, Ben. Foot ad was the name of it.
What?
Foot ad.
Yeah, okay. I'm sure it had different names, yeah.
Hold it up. There you go.
It would have been used when they built the log cabin. The end of the logs had to be notched for them to fit together and hold together, and it would be used to cut that notch. And I think mainly what they did, they'd have a pretty heavy hammer, put it down there, and like a big chisel, really, more so than an axe. These, if you got some of these, hold on to them. You know, what is they used to say, South's gonna rise again. Somebody's gonna rise again, it's gonna be worthwhile. Because I'll just give you an example. I bought this one in Lancaster, Pennsylvania about 25 years ago. I paid $90 for it, which was outrageous. But you see them now advertised on the internet from $250 on up. Now, I don't believe many banks are paying that kind of on an investment. And one other thing about this adze, they date back all the way to the Stone Age. The original ones were made out of stone with some kind of, maybe a split handle and a vine or something tied around it. So that goes way back. Exactly when this one would have been made, I don't know. I'm going to guess at least 100 years or more ago. Let me lay these back down. Watch the time here. I didn't realize we were moving so slow. Okay, this building was the first in this location, this area. It actually was a crossover in one corner of the cemetery. this building was the first building that was not a log cabin. Was built in 1780. Now, maybe the question comes to mind, how did they saw that lumber in 1780? Now, obviously, there were no gasoline engines at that time, or what we would call an internal combustion engine. Pretty sure there were no steam engines, especially in this area. There might have been somewhere. If you been to Williamsburg, there's an example, or I saw it years ago, it may still be there. It's a big rack. They laid the logs on there, and they took a long saw. One person got, whoops, well, this thing getting tired. Person got up on top, the person got under, and they sawed one pull like this, and they sawed out pieces of lumber. Now that had to be a slow process and had to be hard work. So, you know, I doubt that that was done in this area. It could have been, I don't know. So I can't really answer how they got the lumber for this building. Anybody got an idea on that? I'm open for help here because if you read something, yeah.
One of the first things they did here in Piedmont was to build overshot water wheel mills. And once you had an overshot water wheel, you could do any number of things. You could grind grain.
Yeah.
You could run textile machinery, and you could run a sawmill.
Okay, thank you.
So I think that's the way that
Yeah.
that works.
That could be an action. Now, if you there's sort of remnants of a mill like that out beyond. I live out beyond Eastern High School, up there on Dickey Mill Road. There's the Dickey Mill, which is an old grist mill, and they've had it running some in recent years. And I don't think it was ever a sawmill, but it was a place for grain to be ground, that sort of thing. So there were water wheels in this area.
Maybe they were doing down there on the old place where I was raised, up Hall Creek.
Yeah, okay, I remember that.
There was a sawmill, they run the water.
Yeah, okay, just beyond where 54 crosses, sort of?
No, this was up toward Holland Acres, back up in that section.
Okay, yeah, okay. Of course, you've got to have a certain amount of elevation to be able to operate one of those. Now, if you're interested in seeing one of those, not the sawmill, but I'm talking about the grist mill, there's one sort of on the south side of Raleigh. Trying to think, if you know where Lake Wheeler is, it's on just beyond there, and they operate it at certain times. We carried, it might have been 10 years ago, we carried a group of men from this church down there, and of course we had to have an appointment if we were going to see it operate. It doesn't operate all the time, but they got it fixed up, you know, pretty good shape, and we'll operate. This, now, you're welcome to come up and look at these later, and I'll take the tops off of them. This had a very unusual inside. The podium or speaker stand is on one side, and the pews face that, and there was this tremendous soundboard, I call it. Maybe it has a different name. I think the idea was that if, of course, you know, they hadn't heard tell of a PA system back then. I think the idea was that if you're under that thing and talking, it sends the sound out. Now, whether that was effective or not, I have no idea, but maybe they thought it was at least. So that was, and this building had a very elaborate platform and all for the pulpit. And I read one place that said it was considered, there wasn't anything like it on this side of heaven. So I don't know why they went to such a great effort to do this pulpit in this building. And this building stood right over in the corner of the cemetery. There's a marker there that states where it was there, and one of the ministers at that time wanted to be buried under that church, and so he was. There was a grave site there that was covered at one time by the building. Now, any questions so far? Don't mind stopping it.
Benny,
Yeah.
how did the church get from the original site here to the cemetery, I guess the second and third church site?
Of course, they bought some land up here to start with, but I think the idea was, and they probably, I mentioned Providence early on. Now, whether or not that sort of was an act of Providence, I don't know, but they got the idea that the population was going to move in this direction. And, I think they over-guessed that because it certainly had moved in this direction. We need to send some of them back to Hillsborough. But anyway, that's the only thing I've ever been able, that's a good question. I think, and they originally had some land over there, what's the cemetery, and then when they got ready to build this building, somebody made this land available, and some of you, most of you know, I'm sure, but the manse, which is the minister's residence, is just beyond this wooded area. That wooded area and Ballfield and all back here are all part of the church property, plus the cemetery. Okay, moving on now. Let me do just a word, and I'll try to finish up here in a few minutes. I got some tools, and I had jokingly told somebody we were going to have a contest so you could name them, but I just picked these up because I thought it'd be interesting. I thought these young guys over here would appreciate seeing some of these. Yeah.
The wagon wheel wrench.
Uh,
The wrench attached to the wagon wheel.
right. What else did it serve as?
I don't know.
Okay. He's right. It took the nut off a wagon wheel, and also it served as a pin to hold the doubletree in place. The doubletree was what was behind the horses and hooked up. A lot of you already know that. I realize some of you don't, so I'm going to try to explain it as we go on. This probably served some other purposes. I don't know if anybody ever got in a fight with one of these, but it would be pretty effective. This is, well, not really rare, but not too many of them around. Now, my friend sitting over here knew exactly what this was, but he knows a lot about some of this stuff. And, it's called a chain drill, and it's used when you need to drill a hole. If you're standing on a ladder up somewhere, you need to drill a hole into a post. You put this chain around the post, put the bit in here, you put the brace, the thing you're going to turn it with, and this pulls the chain back and pulls the bit into the post. Now, and I'm going to get into talking about this building here. Part of the structure above us is, part of it is some hewed out wood that would have been cut with one of these axes that I showed you. Part of it, the rafters and the ceiling joists were actually sawed on some kind of sawmill. Now, I'm guessing that when they built this building in 1852, there were at least some steam engines around, and probably they saw these pieces of timber, and they are tremendous. How they ever got that up there, I have no idea. My only guess is that they put a scaffold solid in here to work on. They simply didn't have any crane, I don't think, that they could bring here, nothing like that, I don't think. But some parts of it are pegged together, and I've got this wooden peg came out of the old house that I mentioned that was a stagecoach station. So that peg is, I think it's old, but it's sort of hard to tell when it gets that old. Probably is at least 200 years old and maybe a little bit more. Because, 200 years out, that doesn't go back too far. That doesn't even go back into the 1700s. But parts of what's above us put together with this, there are some metal nails involved. Now, it's really hard to get into that attic, but you can get in there. And I hadn't been up there probably 15 or 20 years, and I don't expect to go again. Because you got to see that I'm going around and around here, but it's hard to get everything in and when it ought to be, make sense later on. This building was added onto, that used to be the outside wall. Those rooms back there were added on in the early 1920s, 22 to 24 along there. And there's a little square opening from the attic of that added on building that goes into the attic of the sanctuary. And so that's the only way to get up there. But the last time I was up there, there was a great big nest of some kind back over in the corner. I don't know if birds have been bringing stuff in for 100 years, but that thing was about this big and 3 or 4 feet high. Hung across that nest was a black snake skin. I mean, big black snake down there. And thought ran through my mind, what if we sitting in here one Sunday morning, the preacher's up here, that black snake falls through.
What does
I
happen?
expect we can clear out some windows and the preacher's gonna get run over.
I imagine there'll be a lot of miracles that day.
Now, I want to tell one more snake tale while I have it. And there have been some around here, not recently, but, and this is sort of strange. The original musical instruments were the old pump organs. And I guess that was an economic thing because I think at some point all the pianos still had to come from Europe or England somewhere, which would have been very expensive to get them here. The organs could be built, I don't mean local right here, but somewhere around. The material in those organs wasn't that complicated, so to speak. But anyway, at some point, they brought in a new piano. And some church member, a man, and I don't know his name, but I wouldn't call it anyway, got all upset and said they brought the devil right into the church. And so he stopped coming to church. Well, in a couple of weeks, they're in here, service going on. Big snake crawls out of that new piano. The next Sunday, that man was back, and they said, well, what happened? They said, well, the devil left. So. Okay, now that falls in that category. It could be some basis for it, but most likely it's a made-up tale. Any goodness.
Keep talking. Just keep talking.
Now I'm going to have to stop. One other thing I wanted to point out that going back to the trees, by the time they got ready to build this building, what happened? Trees were right there ready to cut and build this building. Now, that makes you think what was going on there. And there's a lot of timber in this building, although the walls are solid brick. There are 3 courses of brick. Above these windows, there's no got a name. No metal, what's it called? Lintel, okay, there's nothing up there. The brick are laid in an arch that supports the area above that. And the wall go all the way around. Now, obviously, there is wood or timber inside here, the windows, and we restored this building, whenever the 9/11 thing happened. We were working here that morning when that happened. But anyway, we put in some new glass, and you can buy what they call restoration glass panels, and it's got the imperfections built into it that were in the original. So we've got some of that here, some of the original, and I'm sure there's some glass panes left that are neither. They've been added in there at some point. But one more. This too is, of course, it's an old hand plane, but it's made to cut a groove or some kind of design. Yeah, I'm sorry. If I don't hold it up, holler. But you're welcome to come look at these. Now, you remember I told you about seeing a big display of these, and that was some years back. But there are some of these around, but they're not really plentiful. This is just a small one. They come in, some of them are really big. This is what's called a marking gauge. If you wanted to, if you were going to, for example, look over at the molding around these windows, those grooves in there, that wasn't cut out by some electric machine because they simply didn't exist. That was cut out, not with this, but something similar, this type of hand tool. You would use this to run down the side and make a mark to go by. Now, if you want to try to imagine something going on, just glance around at how many of those things there are and how long that took some people to cut them. I can't even, it just doesn't have time to think about that. These posts or columns under here, as far as I can tell, are cast iron. I was in, might be 20 years ago, I was in Mississippi and stopped in a little town, and there was an old service station there where the roof came over and there were no tanks left, but there were columns or posts there, had to come out of the same place as these did. And I have no idea where that was, but they were made somewhere and put here. Now, I want to cover this light chandelier and then I'll stop. Originally, this chandelier, or parts of it at least, was up there and it was kerosene operated. Now, at some point, and I'm going to say about 1920, they got a gas generator, and if you go down between here and the manse, you'll notice in an old log building, a small building there, you don't notice it unless you look for it, but that's where the generator was located, furnished location for this building and for the manse. Now, it wasn't too long after that until Duke Power came along and ran electricity out here, and they put in some light bulbs hanging from the ceiling. Now, you can imagine about how much light that gave. It wasn't a whole lot, but we had lights anyway. Then, in about 1938, I believe one of the Scott ladies decided that we ought to have something better, and they found one wing of this chandelier under this building, been thrown away. So they took that one wing, and I don't know which one it is because you can't really tell the difference. Took that one wing and reproduced the other wings and got the glass fixtures and converted it to electricity. And it's been up there ever since 1938 or 39, one of those years. Now, it amazes me that somebody at that point could take that one wing and make these others look. You probably couldn't do that today, maybe the computer would get in the way, I don't know what happened. But that says a lot for the workmanship back at that time. Yeah,
Benny, can you talk about the original use of the balcony?
wait a minute, say again.
The original use of the balcony.
Okay, yeah. A lot of things I ought to talk about. This building was built, I'm going to say 10, 12, 15 years before the Civil War. And of course, if you stop and think, slavery was still in existence. Now, when they built this building, and I don't have to give David some credit, when he first came here, he gave this church credit for looking after the slaves. And that was unusual. First time I'd ever heard that, first time I'd ever thought about it. But they made an effort, or not just an effort, but they designed this building for the slaves to use that part of the balcony up there. There was an outside entrance that came in, there were steps outside, came in through that window, and steps on up into the balcony back there. When you go out, if you look up, you can see that there's a seam in the this beaded ceiling. There's a seam there where that's been added on. That's where the steps used to be. Now, after the Civil War, of course, that did away with slavery. The black people in this area eventually got their own churches. There was one right down where a lot of this new building is going on Kimmerer Road there. Parts of it may be still standing. Those churches eventually led into the formation of what is now Melfield Church down between here and Alexander Wilson. Now, does that answer your question? Okay, yeah.
Can you talk about these pews? Were they made from the lumber around here, or?
Okay, that's a good point. Now, I was supposed to include that when I was talking about the tree.
That's okay.
If you
That was the general.
If you'll look at these boards and these pews, I hadn't measured them, but what are they? Good 18 inches wide.
Yeah.
If you know anything at all, you know that took a tremendous tree. And that's what I was trying to get at early on, that took a big tree, and it took a whole lot of them. If you start counting these seats, probably, I doubt one tree even made one of these pews across here, maybe two or three of these pieces. Now, if you notice, this arm piece is a different kind of wood. That is yellow poplar, and there are several reasons why that could have been used instead of the pine that the rest of it. The pine does not finish well on the end grain. It's got sort of an open grain, and you can sand and sand, and it never really comes smooth. This yellow poplar was, somebody decided that would be better. Now, how that got here is a good question. If you go to, and I need some help here. Who was a man in Milton that was a cabinet builder way back? What's his name?
Thomas
Yeah,
Day.
Thomas Day. Okay, I don't do names anymore. Thomas Day had a shop in Milton. If you go in the Presbyterian church in Milton, the armrests are almost identical to these. A few years back, they had a display honoring Thomas Day at the Museum of History in Raleigh. And they had patterns there that these could have been made from. Now, that doesn't guarantee they were, but it makes me believe that these armrests were cut out in Milton and hauled down here on a horse and wagon and used at this point. Now, if you ask me to prove that, of course we can't. But you can't prove they didn't either, so.
So Benny, these are original pews
Yes.
that have been
Yes.
here since 1852.
Well, they were brown,
Yeah, they had a,
and then the families each took pews and resanded
Yeah.
them and.
These pews had a dark stain on them, up until when, Larry, 1950s or something?
Probably, yeah.
Something like that, maybe a little later, I can't. They took them all out, sanded them, the men here worked on them for days, sanded all of them. Then again, they were taken out. We restored this building, as I told you, it was going on, just a minute, yeah.
Tell us about the brick men made.
The brick.
Oh, yeah, okay. The brick in the walls of this building were fired right up the road here. If you know where the elementary school, what is it, Garrett and Hawfields? Okay. When they first started, when they built the school there, they couldn't get any grass to grow. And I told them, well, it's very simple. The topsoil is all down here in these walls. That's where these brick came from, right off of the top of the soil up there. And I don't know where they actually fired. Maybe up there or maybe somewhere here. But our local people, I'm sure somebody was supervising, but our local people did a lot of that work. Now, they've held up really well. When those people were working here to restore this building, they were going to redo the mortar joints out there. And the guy came along and was down on the ground, and I was looking after that. I spent almost one summer here. He told me, he said, this mortar right above the ground is different than the mortar on up. And sure enough it was. They could not touch that mortar with a chisel or anything. It just didn't give. So we decided at that point not to mess with it. It's been there all that time. And now, some of the higher joints did need repair. And they followed what's considered some kind of guideline by some historical association for restoring old buildings. They could not use any power tools at all to clean out the mortar joints. It all had to be done by hand. It had to be replaced by hand, and on and on. And they followed that. It was a hot summer, and they worked out there. They'd put them up in a little shelter and keep the sun off. But they worked on and on to replace those mortar joints around this building. And it still now is in pretty good shape. Now also they came in here, and first the guy, he wanted to cover these walls with sheetrock. And I told him, no, we're not even going to talk about that. We're going to replaster. So they tore the plaster off. Plaster had been up there as original, and it was in bad shape. Plaster at some point simply deteriorates and won't stick to the wall. So they tore it all off. It took days to clean this place up. And there was a guy, he was Greek, and he was from somewhere, I think a Chapel Hill area, but he plastered this whole thing himself. I came in here one day and he had a ladder slung across here, and he was up there he was singing, just plastering back and forth, and he worked it out, I don't know how long, and replastered this whole building. That's a whole lot of plaster.
Ben, I had the opportunity to go on the roof about 30 years ago when they put a new one on there. All the sheet, all the boards on the roof are 16, 18 inches back, every one of them.
Some of that could have been, Joe, you know, when they saw these pieces, there had to be some pieces left over, smaller or something. So some of that could have come from the same trees that this did. But there again, two more things that go along with the trees. There are at least two buildings left. One is the Kimmery's barn down there that took a tremendous amount of timber. And I don't know the exact background of that, but I'm sure it was cut local. And the barn down at Henderson Scott's home place, big old barn, I can remember when that timber was cut, and it was cut local. And the Newland man from Henderson, where was he from? The Newland man that built your barn there. Snow Camp, yeah, okay, there you go. He built that barn and some of his family members, and they worked there a long time, and they, I can remember they put those rafters together in a big frame out there and raised them up and set them in place. It was really something to watch that a group of men work, and it was all by hand. They didn't. They used hand saws, no electric equipment whatsoever. And I'm sure your people there, the Henry barn. Do you remember the old barn when it was built?
About 1920, I think.
1920, okay. And the other one, what, in the 30s?
About the late 30s, I think.
Yeah, okay.
Around 1940.
Maybe the roof in my house is timbered the same way this roof is timbered.
Oh, yeah, okay, okay.
So the same thing, the pegs and the room.
Yeah, yeah. You know, like I told you, I've been up in that attic, but it's been a long time ago. I can remember when they rebuilt that thing. Mr. Jim Scott was, of course, having it done. Billy, who was Henderson's younger brother, a couple of us were out there. We were just kids. But they had that house jacked up and dug a basement under. And then they laid it back down on a foundation and then remodeled the whole thing, and eventually somebody else added that kitchen there. And of course they had the, I can remember the old ice house out there, where it was a big place that stored ice and cut ice off with pond down there and brought it up, and that way.
That was Henderson Scott, who's
Yeah.
Henderson's great-grandfather,
Right,
who
okay.
built this church.
Yeah, okay. Okay, I'm sorry to keep you so long. I didn't mean to talk so long, but try not to leave out anything. Thank you for coming. Really.